Plasma fire tore through the crystal walls. Colonel Harrison threw himself over the Queen's body as another explosion rocked the throne room, shards of luminescent material raining down like broken stars. The smell of ionized air mixed with something he couldn't identify, alien blood maybe, or the residue of weapons that shouldn't exist. His ears rang from the blast. Zyra's breathing came shallow beneath him, one hand pressed against him for support. Her silver skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor over the past 4 weeks, the hybrid child inside her draining life force faster than anyone had predicted. Behind them, the sound of boots, heavy metallic, closing in. General Voron's rebel forces had breached the last defensive line. Hawk could hear Commander Kael shouting orders somewhere in the chaos, plasma rifles discharging in staccato bursts that reminded him of automatic fire in a desert he'd left behind 34 years ago. Zyra's eyes met his, those impossible purple irises that had first captivated him, now dimmed with exhaustion. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear over the destruction. She was trying to tell him to run, to save himself, to abandon her like any rational person would. But James Harrison had never been good at the rational choice, not when it mattered. Another explosion, closer. The throne itself cracked down the middle, that ancient seat of power splitting like the empire it represented. Hawk tightened his grip on the plasma rifle he'd learned to use over 3 desperate weeks, the weapon's alien weight somehow familiar now in his calloused hands. How did an old Marine from Texas end up protecting an alien queen carrying his child? How did a 62-year-old NASA engineer become the last line of defense for an empire spanning 3-star systems? How did the ghosts of Kuwait and the memory of his dead son lead him here to a crystal palace orbiting Earth, ready to die for a woman who wasn't even human? To understand that you'd need to go back 3 weeks, back to when the sky first opened and everything changed. 3 weeks earlier, the Nevada desert stretched endless and indifferent under a sun that could kill a man in hours without water. Hawk had his shirt off despite the heat, sweat running down his back as he leaned into the shuttle's engine compartment. His hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the fuel mixture valve without consulting the manual lying forgotten on the tarmac. 55 clicks outside Edwards Air Force Base, the world felt pleasantly empty. Just him, the shuttle, and the kind of mechanical problem he could actually solve. Not like the other kind, the kind that involves stars and bars on a coffin, or a wife who'd stopped breathing in her sleep 5 years ago, or the hollow ache that lived in his chest where purpose used to reside. The wrench slipped. He caught it before it fell, muscle memory from 4 decades of working with his hands. 4 decades since he'd been 28 years old, lean and hungry, driving across the Saudi desert toward Kuwait with the rest of 2nd Marine Division. 4 decades since he'd learned what it meant to hold a position against impossible odds. The scar on his left shoulder ached, souvenir from the Battle of Khafji in 1991, where he'd earned his Purple Heart holding a position everyone else thought was already lost. The medal sat in a drawer at home, tarnished from neglect and indifference. His communicator crackled to life, making him flinch. Old habits. In the Gulf, unexpected radio chatter had often preceded something explosive. Sarah Hayes's voice cut through the static, younger and sharper than his weathered drawl. The words she spoke didn't make sense at first. Something about arrivals, something about protocols, something about the ski. Hawk straightened one hand, shading his eyes as he looked up. The sky was wrong. Not wrong in a way most people would notice, no clouds out of place, no birds fleeing, but wrong in the way a battlefield goes quiet right before contact. Then he saw it, a shape that his brain refused to process correctly, geometry that bent light in impossible ways. A ship. Not a plane, not a satellite. A ship crystalline and massive, descending through Earth's atmosphere like a cathedral learning to fly. His pulse didn't quicken. That was one thing the Gulf had taught him. Panic got Marines killed. Instead, his mind shifted into that cool analytical state, the one that had kept him breathing when Iraqi Republican Guard tanks rolled toward his position. Calculate, assess, respond. The ship was heading for Area 52, the facility 3 miles northwest that officially didn't exist, which meant someone with more stars on their collar than he'd ever earned had been expecting this. His communicator buzzed again. This time it was Director Morrison from NASA, the man's voice carrying that particular blend of excitement and terror that came with first contact scenarios. They needed him at Area 52. They needed him 20 minutes ago. They needed every military advisor they could get, and apparently a 62-year-old former Marine who fixed shuttles qualified. Hawk wiped his hands on a rag, pulled his shirt back on, and climbed into the Jeep without a word. His hands didn't shake. They'd stopped shaking 3 decades ago, somewhere between his second tour and learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was deciding fear didn't get to make the choice. The drive took 12 minutes. He'd made better time in worse conditions. Area 52 had transformed into controlled chaos by the time he arrived. Military vehicles surrounded the perimeter, proper army this time, not the private security that usually guarded the facility. Hawk spotted F-22s doing high-altitude circles overhead, ready to respond to a threat they couldn't possibly understand. Ambassador David Walsh stood at the facility's entrance, 68 years old and looking every day of it. The man had negotiated peace treaties in 5 different war zones, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this. His tie sat crooked, a detail Walsh would normally never allow. Walsh's eyes found Hawk's, and something like relief crossed his weathered face. They had met twice before at Department of Defense functions neither had wanted to attend. Walsh knew Hawk's record, not just the official one, but the real one, the one that included holding Kafji for 3 days, when command had written them off as lost. The ambassador's mouth moved, forming words about delegation and protocols and historic moments. Hawk listened with half his attention, the other half cataloging exits and defensive positions. Old habits. A Marine could take the man out of the war, but the war stayed in the man's bones. The delegation would be 6 people. Walsh leading because diplomacy. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes because they needed a pilot who understood both military discipline and NASA technology. Dr. Robert Chen from the medical division because someone had to assess biological compatibility. 2 scientists whose names Hawk immediately forgot because in crisis situations, scientists rarely change outcomes. And Hawk, because when humanity met something unknown, having someone who'd stared down Iraqi tanks and lived to tell about it seemed like insurance worth having. Walsh's hand gripped his shoulder, the touch carrying weight beyond words. The ambassador's voice dropped low, meant only for Hawk's ears. If things go sideways, if this is a threat, you're our fail-safe. Hawk nodded once. He'd been a fail-safe before. Usually it meant other people had already failed. The ship completed its landing sequence with a sound like singing crystal, a harmonic that resonated in Hawk's chest cavity. Up close, the vessel defied every engineering principle he'd learned in 4 decades. No visible propulsion, no seams, just flowing curves of material that caught sunlight and refracted it into colors he had no names for. Lieutenant Hayes moved up beside him, her eyes wide behind her pilot's calm. She'd flown combat missions over Afghanistan, had 300 hours in experimental aircraft, but this was beyond her experience. Beyond anyone's experience. The scientist to Hawk's left was breathing too fast, hyperventilating toward panic. Hawk caught the man's eyes and shook his head, once a Marine Corps negative that carried the weight of command even without rank behind it. The scientist's breathing steadied. The ship's entrance dilated open. Not a ramp lowering or a door sliding, the material itself changed state solid, becoming passage in a transformation that hurt to watch. Light spilled out, not white like sunlight or yellow like electricity, but something purer, clean. The kind of light that existed before mankind learned to pollute it with purpose. A figure emerged from that light, tall, the first detail that registered in Hawk's tactical assessment, 6'3" at minimum, which put this being a head taller than Walsh and level with Hawk's own height. The second detail female or something equivalent. The third armed, though the weapon remained holstered at her hip. But it was the fourth detail that locked his attention. She moved like a warrior, not like a diplomat playing at strength, not like a politician with security training, like someone who'd fought and bled and made the hard calls when good people died for necessary reasons. Hawk had seen that walk before in the mirror every morning for 34 years. The alien because there was no other word for what she was studied them with eyes the color of deep amethyst. Her skin held a silver luminescence, not metallic but organic, as if starlight lived under the surface. She wore what appeared to be armor, though it flowed like fabric, form and function merged in ways human engineering hadn't achieved. Ambassador Walsh stepped forward, beginning the greeting they'd practiced. Formal, respectful, the kind of diplomatic language that said nothing while filling space. The alien queen, and she was a queen, Hawk knew that immediately, could see it in her bearing. Let Walsh finish. Then she spoke in perfect English, her voice carrying harmonics that made him think of struck bells. "Welcome, we seek alliance, not subjects." The phrasing struck him. Not "we seek allies" or "we seek partnership." Alliance, a military term, a warrior's term, the language of someone who understood that equals fought together, not for each other. Her eyes swept the delegation, cataloging, assessing, measuring. They lingered on Lieutenant Hayes for a moment, recognizing another pilot, perhaps then moved to Dr. Chen, the two scientists, Ambassador Walsh. Each received 3 seconds of attention, no more. Then those purple eyes found Hawks and stopped. Time did something strange. Not slow, not stop, but compressed the way moments did in combat when adrenaline sharpened everything to crystalline clarity. She saw the Purple Heart ribbon on his shirt. He'd worn his NASA contractor uniform, complete with his service decorations. Her gaze moved to his hands, scarred and calloused from decades of work. Up to his face, weathered by 62 years of sun and decisions. Her head tilted slightly, a question forming in the gesture. When she spoke again, the words were directed at him alone. "You are a warrior." Not a question, a statement. Recognition passing between two people who'd both learned what it meant to send others into danger and live with the consequences. Hawk's voice came out steady, decades of discipline keeping it level. "Used to be, Your Majesty." Desert Storm, 1991. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but approval, respect, the acknowledgement of shared experience across species and stars. She understood. She'd stood where he'd stood, made calls he'd made, carried weight he recognized. The Queen's name was Zixaria. Her people called her Zyra because some truths were too heavy for full titles. She ruled the Vexthor Empire, 3 systems and 40 planets a domain, built from the ashes of a 50-year war against an enemy called the Krill. She'd been a warrior before she'd been a queen, had led fleets into battle, had lost friends and soldiers and pieces of her soul to that grinding conflict. The Great Krill War had ended 20 years ago with an armistice, not victory. Her people had survived, but survival wasn't the same as triumph. They'd lost too much, bled too much. The kind of war that left scars deeper than flesh. Hawk understood. Kuwait had been 100 hours of combat, preceded by months of waiting and followed by decades of remembering. Quick wars left long shadows. They moved inside the facility for the formal negotiations. The throne room Zyra had brought with her, some kind of deployable space within the ship, stretched 200 feet high, crystalline walls catching and amplifying light until it felt like standing inside a prism. Alien architecture that made human engineering look like children playing with blocks. The discussions moved through expected territory, trade agreements, technology exchange, cultural protocols, all the diplomatic dance that Ambassador Walsh excelled at while Hawk stood at parade rest and calculated firing lanes, estimated response times, mapped the room. With a tactician's eye he couldn't turn off if he tried. Zyra answered Walsh's questions with patience, offered information about Vexthor agricultural techniques and medical advances, described the armistice with the Krill in terms that suggested the peace was fragile. But Hawk could see something else operating beneath the surface. Tension, purpose. She hadn't come to Earth just to discuss trade routes. The ambassador concluded the initial session with diplomatic pleasantries, suggesting they reconvene the following day. Zyra nodded acceptance. Then her eyes found Hawk's again across the throne room, and she spoke words that fractured the carefully constructed diplomatic facade. "We require genetic material from your strongest warrior. The Vexthor Empire needs an heir. You have 24 hours to determine who will volunteer." The silence that followed held a quality beyond quiet. It was the silence of people's brains, refusing to process information of reality, bending far enough to break. Dr. Chen's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The scientists looked at each other, then at Walsh, then at their feet. Lieutenant Hayes recovered first, her voice sharp, with the kind of anger that came from feeling ambushed. "That's not how first contact protocols work. You can't just demand." Zyra's gaze shifted to Hayes, not hostile, but absolute. The weight of authority that came from ruling billions. "We do not demand, we request. But make no mistake, this is the alliance we seek. Vexthor needs an heir. Our genetics have become limited. We have searched for compatible partners among allied species for 50 years. Your people are the first match we have found." Walsh tried to recover diplomatic ground, his politician's instincts reaching for middle positions and reasonable compromises. But Zyra cut through it with a warrior's directness. 24 hours. Choose or we depart, and this opportunity closes. She turned and walked back toward her ship, the material of the entrance, responding to her presence, opening without touch or command. The delegation stood in shocked stillness as she disappeared into that impossible light. Hawk's mind worked through the implications with the cold clarity that combat had taught him. This wasn't a diplomatic request. It was a transaction. Genetic material in exchange for alliance. Crude, perhaps, but honest in a way that political negotiations rarely achieved. And strategic. If Zyra truly needed an heir, if her empire's stability depended on succession, then she was playing for stakes higher than technology exchange. She was playing for survival. He respected that. Respected the directness. Respected someone who said what they meant instead of hiding truth behind pleasant words. The ride back to the shuttle bay happened in numb silence. Walsh kept checking his communicator, probably reporting up chains of command that had no protocol for this scenario. Hayes's jaw was tight with fury, the kind of anger that came from realizing you'd been a prop in someone else's play. Dr. Chen looked ill. They gathered in one of NASA's conference rooms, sterile and fluorescent, the mundane setting emphasizing how far outside normal they'd traveled. Walsh paced while the others sat. Words spilled out, legal implications, ethical considerations, biological compatibility, cultural precedent. Everyone talking, no one saying anything useful. Hawk sat quiet, his mind elsewhere, thinking about a ship in the desert 34 years ago, thinking about the moment he'd volunteered to hold Kafji when command was ready to write the position off, thinking about Michael, his son, who died at 24 doing the same stupid brave thing his father had taught him. Michael had volunteered too, for Afghanistan, for Helmand Province, for one more patrol when he could have stayed on base. He died protecting his squad from an IED, throwing himself on the threat the way Hawk had thrown himself over Zyra's body 3 weeks in a future that hadn't happened yet. The voices around him blurred into white noise. Hayes saying something about consent and agency. Dr. Chen explaining why human-alien reproduction was biologically impossible. Walsh worrying about political ramifications. All of them dancing around the real question. Who volunteers to become part of an alien empire's future? Who gives up everything they know for a diplomatic gamble? Who had enough recklessness, enough fatalism, enough hollow space where purpose used to live, that throwing themselves at an impossible situation sounded better than returning to an empty house and a dead-end job fixing shuttles? Lieutenant Hayes' voice cut through his thoughts. Colonel, you're being awfully quiet. What are you thinking? He looked up, met her eyes, saw concern there, saw youth. She was 35, still believed things got better, still thought careful planning prevented disaster. Give her another decade and life would teach her different. Hawk's voice came out steady, the same tone he'd used 34 years ago when telling his commanding officer he'd hold the position. I'm thinking I'll do it. The room went silent. Even Walsh stopped pacing. Doctor, Hasham. Chen recovered first, Colonel. You can't. The biological incompatibility alone, I heard you the first time. Still volunteering. Hayes leaned forward, her expression shifting from anger to something like alarm. Sir, you understand what you're agreeing to. You'd be staying on that ship, maybe permanently. This isn't like a deployment where you come home in a year. Hawk met her eyes without flinching. I understand, Lieutenant. Walsh moved closer, his diplomat's mask cracking to show genuine concern beneath Hawk. I need you to think about this. Really think. This isn't a combat decision. You don't have to be the one who falls on the grenade. But that's exactly what it was. Someone had to make the hard call, and he was the one in the room who'd already lost everything that mattered. Walsh had grandchildren. Hayes had a career and a fiancé back in Houston. Dr. Chen had research that might cure leukemia. The scientists had futures. Hawk had a dead wife, a dead son, and a job he did competently without passion. He had skills that were obsolete in any context except the one they just stumbled into. And he had 62 years of life that had taught him when opportunity looked like sacrifice, you didn't waste time with fear. Through his shirt pocket, he could feel the outline of his son's photo, that worn image from boot camp, where Michael looked young and proud and alive. The corners had gone soft from 14 years of being carried. I lost Michael in 2011, Afghanistan, Helmand Province. He was protecting his squad when an IED went off. The room stayed quiet. They all knew. It was in his file, the redacted version that said KIA without the details, without describing how they'd shipped pieces home in a box too small to contain who he'd been. Your queen needs an heir. Her empire needs stability. Maybe this means something. Walsh's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on resignation. The ambassador had been in enough situations to recognize when someone had made a decision that couldn't be unmade. He pulled out his communicator, began the calls that would turn Hawk's volunteer status into official policy. Hayes sat back studying him with an expression caught between respect and worry. You know this is crazy, Hawk almost smiled. Semper Fidelis doesn't come with fine print. Lieutenant, always faithful means you follow through when it matters. This matters. The response went up the chain. NASA to Department of Defense to the White House to whatever rooms made decisions about first contact with alien empires. It took 6 hours for official approval, which was faster than the Pentagon usually moved on coffee orders. When Walsh's communicator finally chirped confirmation, the ambassador's voice carried weight beyond words. You're clear to proceed, Colonel. God help you. Hawk stood his joints, protesting 6 decades of use. Appreciate that, sir. But I stopped counting on divine intervention somewhere around Kuwait. I'll settle for good luck and clear objectives. They briefed him over the next 12 hours. Medical protocols he wouldn't remember. Cultural guidelines he'd learned by doing. Contingency plans that assumed he'd survive long enough to need extraction. Lieutenant Hayes walked him through the communication equipment they'd hidden in his personal effects disguised as a belt buckle and watch battery. Chen tried one more time to explain the biological impossibility of what Zyra was requesting. Hawk listened to all of it with the patience of someone who'd sat through pre-mission briefings for operations that never survived first contact with the enemy. Plans were useful until reality intervened. Then you adapted or died. 23 hours after Zyra's ultimatum, he walked back into Area 52 carrying a single duffel bag. Everything he owned that mattered fit in 40 pounds of canvas and regret. Photos. His Purple Heart. Michael's dog tags. A paperback copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea Spine cracked from reading. The watch his wife had given him, their last anniversary together. Zyra was waiting at the ship's entrance, still in that flowing armor, still carrying herself like someone who'd sent young warriors to and lived with those ghosts. Her purple eyes found his with that same measuring intensity. You chose yourself, not a question. A statement. She'd known he would, had probably known before she'd made the request. Seemed the logical choice, Your Majesty. I'm 62, lived most of my life already. Others in that room have more future to lose. Something shifted in her expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You speak like a warrior who has seen too much war. I understand this language. Come. She led him inside through corridors of living crystal that pulsed with light. The ship felt organic in ways human vessels didn't, as if it had been grown rather than built. Other Vexthor moved through the passages tall and silver-skinned, their eyes ranging from deep purple to lighter lavender. They watched Hawk with curiosity but not hostility. Zyra's private chambers sat at the ship's heart, a space both intimate and austere. Weapons lined one wall, not decorative but functional, well-maintained. A warrior's trophies. On another wall, something that might have been photographs, frozen moments, showing Vexthor in formation in battle, victorious and broken. She removed her armor piece by piece, revealing simpler clothing beneath. The act felt less like preparation and more like shedding a role, stepping down from queen to something more human. More vulnerable. When she spoke, the diplomatic formality had dropped away. I did not expect this from you. But I appreciate the courage. Hawk set his duffel down carefully, buying time to choose words. Lost my wife 5 years back. Heart attack in her sleep. Lost my son to war in 2011. Your empire needs an heir. Maybe that means something. Maybe it just means I've got less to lose than most. Zyra moved to the wall of weapons, touched one with fingers that carried obvious familiarity. I also know loss. The Great Krill War took 40% of our warriors. I fought for 50 years before ascending to the throne. I lost friends, squad mates, people I loved. War always takes the best parts. The angry response came without thought, pulled from some deep place where he'd buried 34 years of survivor's guilt. She turned to face him fully, and in that moment the distance between human and alien collapsed into something simpler. Two warriors who'd outlived too many of the people they'd led into danger. Two survivors carrying weight that never fully lifted. Your war, Desert Storm. How long did you fight officially? 100 hours of ground combat. But we knew it was coming for months. The waiting killed you slower than the shooting. Zyra nodded, understanding deeper than translation. Anticipation is its own form of death. The Krill War, we fought 50 years, but the peace after has been harder. At least in war, you know who the enemy is. They talked through the evening, through the nighttime, losing meaning in that crystalline chamber. She told him about commanding Vexthor fleets, about making calls that killed thousands to save millions, about the weight of knowing your decisions shape civilizations. He told her about Kafji, about 3 days that should have ended differently, about learning to live with the mathematics of survival. Somewhere in those hours, the distance closed. Not romance, neither of them had the energy for that kind of pretense, but understanding, recognition. The rare gift of speaking with someone who'd stood where you'd stood and still chose to wake up every morning. When dawn broke in Nevada 50 miles away, when Earth rotated toward a sun that didn't touch this crystalline chamber, Zyra stood close enough that he could see the subtle variations in her silver skin, the way light played across features both alien and achingly familiar. She spoke quietly. This may mean nothing, or everything, but thank you for choosing to stay. Hawk's response came equally soft. Haven't done much worth thanking lately. Maybe this changes that. What happened next felt inevitable in the way storms felt inevitable when clouds gathered and pressure dropped. Two people who'd learned that touch could be comfort, that connection mattered more than species, that loneliness ached the same in any language. When morning came, real morning measured by ship chronometers rather than Earth rotation, Hawk woke alone. Zyra had already donned her armor, resumed her crown, transformed back from warrior sharing, vulnerability to queen, commanding an empire. The distance felt appropriate somehow, natural. They'd shared what needed sharing and now returned to their roles. He spent the next 5 days in observation. The ship remained parked at Area 52 while Zyra and Ambassador Walsh negotiated formal alliance terms. Hawk moved through the vessel, learning its rhythms, nodding to Vexthor warriors who recognized something in him even if they couldn't name it. Lieutenant Hayes checked in daily via the hidden communicator, asking questions he couldn't answer about conditions and treatment and whether he needed extraction. He kept his responses minimal. Fine. Safe. Learning. The truth was more complicated than comm protocols allowed. On the 5th day, Zyra summoned the delegation for an emergency session. Hawk stood in the throne room again, Ambassador Walsh and the others arriving with confused expressions. The Queen's face remained neutral, but something in her bearing suggested a shift. When everyone had assembled, when the crystalline chamber fell silent, Zyra spoke with that bell voice that carried absolute authority. I carry life. The child is the humans. Colonel Harrison will remain. The silence held different qualities this time. Shock, yes, but also the weight of consequences of reality reshaping around words that couldn't be taken back. Dr. Chen found his voice, first medical training, overriding diplomacy. Your Majesty, that's not possible. Human and Vexthor genetics are completely incompatible. There's no mechanism for, yet it has occurred, our royal physician confirmed this morning. The hybrid develops within me. Impossible. Dr. Chen's certainty cracked against the absoluteness of her statement. Hawk's mind worked through implications while the others processed shock. A child. His child. Growing inside an alien queen. Biology said no, but reality said yes, and somewhere in that contradiction lay something that should terrify him, but instead felt like purpose taking shape. Walsh recovered diplomatic footing. His voice careful, Your Majesty. This is unexpected. We'll need to discuss terms, protocols, the diplomatic implications. There is nothing to discuss. The child is the heir to Vexthor. Its father remains here. The ambassador's expression shifted. Colonel Harrison has the right to choose. I choose to speak with the Queen privately. Hawk's interruption cut through Walsh's building protest, his voice carrying enough command that even the diplomat fell silent. Zyra nodded once, dismissing the delegation with a gesture. They filed out, Hayes throwing Hawk a look that carried equal parts concern and anger. The doors sealed behind them with that singing crystal sound. Alone with Zyra, the throne room feeling simultaneously enormous and claustrophobic, Hawk let controlled calm slip toward honest reaction. I didn't agree to stay permanently. Our arrangement was for genetic material, not captivity. She stepped down from the throne armor, gleaming every inch a queen. The arrangement changed when conception occurred. You are the father of my heir, of the Vexthor heir. You belong here now. I don't belong to anyone. The words came out harder than intended, pulled from some deep place where freedom mattered more than diplomacy. I volunteered to help. That doesn't make me property. Her expression flickered, something almost like pain, crossing those alien features. I cannot let you go. For the first time in 50 years of war, I have the possibility of an heir. If you leave, I will be alone again. The vulnerability in those words hit him like incoming fire. He'd seen it that first night, buried under warrior discipline and royal duty. The loneliness of command taken to its absolute extreme, 50 years leading people into death, 20 more ruling alone, no partner, no heir, no one to share the weight. I'm sorry, but this isn't my world. My life is, your life is fixing shuttles and mourning ghosts. She cut him off with words that landed too close to truth. I offer you purpose, legacy, something your son would understand. The invocation of Michael ignited anger he'd kept controlled. You don't get to use my son. You don't know what he died protecting others, as you did at Kafji, as you did when you volunteered. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in her purple eyes. Do not pretend I do not understand you, James Harrison. We are more alike than you wish to admit. Her hand moved to summon guards before he could respond. Commander Kale sealed the shuttle bay. No one leaves without my authorization. The weight of it settled over him like desert sand. He was trapped, stranded on an alien vessel by biology and circumstance and his own stupid tendency to volunteer for impossible situations. That night ship night, measured by artificial cycles, they gave him quarters near Zyra's chambers. Comfortable, well-appointed, luxurious as any cage could be. He sat on the bed examining the hidden communicator in his belt buckle. Lieutenant Hayes would be monitoring. He could signal her, tell her to find a way in, mount an extraction. Marines didn't leave people behind, and Hayes still carried that code, even though she'd transferred to NASA. His finger hovered over the activation switch. Then he heard it, a sound through the crystal walls. Crying, quiet and controlled but unmistakable. Zyra, the queen who ruled billions. The warrior who'd commanded fleets. Crying alone in her chambers because she'd just revealed the one vulnerability she couldn't armor against her desperate need not to be abandoned again. Hawk's hand fell away from the communicator. Morning brought General Voren. Hawk was examining his quarters, cataloging potential weapons and exit routes from pure habit when the door opened without warning. The Vexthor who entered carried himself with military bearing. Hawk recognized immediately. Officer class, combat veteran, politician wearing a warrior's face. Voren's English came accented, but clear. Colonel Harrison. I wish to speak with you privately. Hawk turned slowly, hands loose but ready. I'm assuming the Queen authorized this visit. The general's smile carried no warmth. Her Majesty need not know every conversation that occurs on her ship. That admission alone told Hawk everything about where this conversation would lead. Voren positioned himself between Hawk and the door, not obviously threatening but strategically sound. A man used to controlling situations. The hybrid is an abomination. Voren's directness would have been refreshing if the content weren't so ugly. It violates every precedent of Vexthor succession. Many share my concern. Sounds like a them problem. Hawk kept his voice level, his body language unthreatening. People who wanted violence broadcast intentions in a dozen small ways. Better to stay calm and map the room. It is your problem as well. Voren stepped closer, his purple eyes holding calculation. I offer you a choice. Leave. Now. Return to your planet. The child will die with the Queen, unable to survive without your genetic stability. I will assume the throne. Your involvement in this incident will be forgotten. And if I refuse, then you die with them. The bluntness carried the weight of absolute certainty. I command 40% of the military. When the Queen gives birth, if she survives, she will be weak. That is when I move. You cannot protect her. You are one human against an empire. Hawk studied the general's face, reading the mixture of ambition and genuine belief that made zealots dangerous. You really think killing an infant and a weakened mother makes you qualified to rule? I think preserving Vexthor purity makes me necessary. Voron's voice hardened. You have until tomorrow to decide. Escape or die with her. Choose wisely, human. The general left without waiting for response. The door sealed behind him with that crystalline sound that was starting to feel like a cell door closing. Hawk sat on the bed, his mind working through tactical problems. Voron wasn't bluffing. 40% military support meant civil war, and in civil wars the vulnerable died first. Zyra weakened by hybrid pregnancy, the child helpless, both targets in a conflict they couldn't escape. He could run. Hayes would help extract him. By the time Voron moved, Hawk would be back on Earth safe and uninvolved. The Queen would die, she and the child both, but that wasn't his responsibility. He'd volunteered for genetic material, not for eternal commitment. Through the fabric of his pocket, he could feel Michael's dog tags, the metal worn smooth from years of being carried alongside his son's photo. 24 years old in marine dress blues, the same stupid proud look Hawk had worn at that age. Michael, who'd volunteered for Helmand Province. Michael, who died protecting his squad because that's what you did when you wore the uniform. What would his son say if he ran now? What would the ghost sleeping in his chest say about abandoning a woman who'd shown him her vulnerability, about letting a child die before it drew first breath? The decision formed slowly pulled from the same place that had made him hold a kafji, made him volunteer in the first place. Not courage, not heroism. Just the recognition that some lines you couldn't cross without losing the person you still hoped you were. He was considering how to warn Zyra about Voron when the sound reached him. Strange. Wrong. The kind of sound that preceded disaster in his experience. Hawk moved fast, training overriding thought. Out the door, down the corridor, following instinct toward Zyra's chambers. The guards outside looked alarmed but didn't stop him. Maybe his connection to the Queen granted informal access. Maybe they recognized emergency when they saw it. Inside, Zyra had collapsed. Her silver skin had gone gray, her breathing shallow and labored. The royal physician hovered over her with equipment. Hawk didn't recognize the medical officer's expression, carrying the universal language of, oh shit. The physician's eyes found Hawk's, the hybrid. It develops too rapidly, drawing her life force faster than we predicted. Hawk knelt beside Zyra, his hand finding hers without thought. Her purple eyes opened, focusing with effort. You came. Of course I came. The response emerged, automatically pulled from instincts he'd thought he'd lost with his wife's death. The physician continued, his voice carrying technical precision that failed to hide panic. We need continued genetic material from you to stabilize the pregnancy. Daily transfusions. If you leave, both mother and child will die within 2 weeks. The weight of it settled over Hawk like armor, like duty, like the inevitable conclusion he'd been walking toward since he'd first volunteered. He looked at Zyra's gray skin, at the way her hand gripped his with desperate strength, at the evidence of a life depending on choices he hadn't fully understood when he'd made them. Lieutenant Hayes' voice echoed in memory. You understand what you're agreeing to. Now he did. Not theoretical agreement, but visceral understanding. Staying wasn't about diplomacy or alliance or abstract concepts of genetic compatibility. It was about the woman in front of him dying if he left. The child is child dying because biology created bonds harder than law. Hawk's voice came out steady, carrying the certainty of surrender to circumstances bigger than pride. I'll stay. Until the child is born safe. Until they're both safe. Zyra's eyes closed, relief crossing her features. Thank you. The physician moved immediately, preparing equipment for the first transfusion. Hawk watched the preparations with the detached calm of someone who'd just committed to a course that would reshape everything. No going back now, no extraction, no return to a quiet life, fixing shuttles in Nevada. He'd volunteered to be a failsafe. Now he was learning what that really meant, not dying dramatically in a single moment, but living with consequences that stretched forward into an unknowable future. Staying because leaving would kill something that depended on him. Becoming responsible not through choice, but through the aftermath of choices already made. The transfusion process took 30 minutes. Hawk sat in the medical bay, watching his blood move through crystalline tubes into Zyra's weakened body, the interface between human and alien biology, monitored by equipment that hummed at frequencies his ears couldn't quite process. The royal physician worked with practiced efficiency, adjusting flow rates and checking readings on displays that shifted colors and patterns. Hawk had learned not to question. Zyra's color improved gradually, silver returning to skin that had gone the shade of tarnished metal. Her breathing steadied. When she opened her eyes fully, they held clarity that had been absent during the collapse. The physician's voice carried cautious optimism. The hybrid responds to the genetic stabilization. We will need to repeat this daily. 30 minutes, sometimes more, if the child's development accelerates. Hawk nodded, watching the last of his blood complete its journey. 30 minutes daily, for weeks. Maybe months, depending on how fast this impossible child grew. 30 minutes of forced proximity with a woman who was simultaneously captor and patient queen and prisoner of biology, neither of them had predicted. The physician disconnected the tubes with gentle precision. You may both rest now. I will return tomorrow at the same time. After the medical officer departed, silence filled the chamber. Zyra remained reclined on the medical platform, studying Hawk with an intensity that felt equal parts gratitude and assessment. He sat in the chair they'd positioned for the transfusion, his arm showing the faint mark where alien technology had interfaced with human veins. Finally, she spoke. You could have left. General Voran offered you escape. Hawk met her eyes without flinching. You knew about that. I know everything that occurs on my ship, eventually. Her expression held something that might have been amusement if it weren't so tired. He approached you because he believes me weak. He is not entirely wrong. You're not weak. You're pregnant with a hybrid child that's draining your life force. Different problem. A distinction that matters little if it kills me. She shifted on the platform, her hand moving in a protective gesture. Tell me why you stayed. Truth, not diplomacy. Hawk considered several answers before settling on honesty. Had a son who died protecting his squad. Taught him that duty means seeing things through. Can't walk away and pretend I believe that anymore. So you stay from guilt. Her voice held no judgment, just an observation. Stay from principle. There's a difference, but Hawk stood stretching muscles that had gone stiff. Besides, you cried last night. Heard you through the walls. Queens don't get to cry alone if there's someone around to listen. Something shifted in her expression, vulnerability breaking through royal composure. I did not mean to trap you. When I requested genetic material, I did not know. Ancient prophecies do not come with instruction manuals. Prophecy, the word snagged his attention like wire in the dark. What prophecy? Zyra's hesitation lasted 3 heartbeats. Ancient text, 2,000 years old. It speaks of a child born from union between Vexthor and something else. A bridge between warring peoples. Most dismissed it as mythology. I hoped it might be true. But you didn't tell me before I volunteered. Would you have believed me? Her challenge came soft but pointed. Would any human believe in prophecies older than your civilization? Fair point. So we're both trapped. You by biology, me by conscience. Not exactly hearts and flowers. Yet here we are. She rose more carefully, steadier than before, but still moving with caution. Tomorrow, same time. The physician will send for you. Hawk nodded and moved toward the exit. Her voice stopped him at the threshold, James. The use of his first name carried weight, a shift from Colonel Harrison to something more personal. Thank you for staying, for this. He looked back at her, silhouetted against crystalline walls that caught light like frozen starlight. Don't thank me yet. Voran's got 40% of your military. This situation's going to get worse before it gets better. I know, but at least I do not face it alone. The words followed him back to his quarters, settling into the space where Michael's ghost lived. Alone. He understood that particular hell better than most. 5 years since his wife died. 14 since Michael. Time that should have dulled the edges, but instead just taught him to carry weight without showing the strain. Day 2 of transfusions brought conversation. Zyra asked about Desert Storm while the blood flowed between them, her curiosity genuine rather than diplomatic. Hawk found himself describing the waiting before the ground war, the tension of knowing combat was coming, but not when the strange relief, when uncertainty finally resolved into action. She listened with a warrior's understanding, nodding at details others might miss. The anticipation is often worse than the battle itself. At least in combat, you have purpose. Waiting offers only fear. You said you fought the Krill for 50 years. That's a long time to maintain purpose. Zyra's expression darkened with memory. Purpose became survival. Then survival became habit. By the end, I had forgotten what we were fighting for beyond the fact that stopping meant admitting the deaths had been meaningless. Hawk recognized that particular trap. The way wars extended themselves through the logic of sunk costs, dead soldiers, whose sacrifice only mattered if you kept fighting. How did it end? Exhaustion. Both sides too depleted to continue. The armistice came not from victory, but from running out of reasons to keep dying. She paused, then added quietly, I lost friends I loved. People who should have lived to see peace. They died in the final year, the final month. Some in the final week before the ceasefire. The waste of it settled between them, shared understanding that needed no elaboration. Wars killed until they stopped killing, and the ones who died last died for nothing except bad timing. Day 3, Hawk asked about the hybrid's development. The physician showed him scans on displays that meant nothing to his untrained eyes, pointing out a shape that was supposedly his child. Part human, part Vexthor, growing faster than either species' normal gestation. 4 weeks in and already developing at a rate equivalent to 6 months. The child's accelerated growth explained Zyra's deterioration. She was burning through resources meant to last 9 months in a fraction of that time. The daily transfusions helped, but they were stopgap measures buying time without solving the underlying problem. On day 5, Zyra spoke words that shifted something fundamental between them. Why did you volunteer originally before you knew about the pregnancy, before Vorin, before any of this complexity? What made you raise your hand? Hawk had known the question was coming, had felt it building through the forced intimacy of daily blood sharing. Told you. Lost my son in Afghanistan 2011. Helmand Province. He died protecting his squad mates from an IED. But that is what happened, not why you volunteered. The distinction cut closer than he wanted to admit. Michael was 24, had his whole life ahead. He chose to go on patrol that day when he could have stayed on base. Threw himself on the threat because that's what I taught him. That protecting others mattered more than protecting yourself. And he died for it. Yeah, he died for it. The words tasted like ash, like 14 years of regret compressed into simple syllables. And I'm still alive, fixing shuttles and going through motions. You asked why I volunteered. Because maybe protecting something, someone again, might mean Michael's lesson wasn't just the thing that killed him. Zyra's hand covered his, the gesture carrying comfort across the barrier of species. You honor him by living the values you taught, even when they cost you freedom. Freedom's overrated when you don't know what to do with it. The moment held weight beyond words, recognition passing between two people who'd outlived their purposes and found themselves stumbling into new ones. When the physician returned to disconnect the transfusion tubes, neither of them moved immediately, the connection more than medical. Commander Kyle found Hawk on day 7, the Vexthor warrior, approaching with body language that suggested purpose beyond casual conversation. Kale stood 6'4", broader than most of his species, with scars that spoke to extensive combat experience. His purple eyes held the flat assessment of someone evaluating a potential threat or asset. The Queen requests your presence in the tactical center. Kyle's English came rougher than Zyra's accent, thicker but comprehensible. We face situation requiring military consultation. Hawk followed without question, curiosity overriding the instinct to demand details before committing. The tactical center occupied the ship's strategic heart, a chamber where holographic displays showed real-time data about the vessel's systems surrounding space and what Hawk assumed were troop deployments. Zyra stood at the center console, her armor gleaming under the display lights, her bearing carrying the weight of command despite the pregnancy that was slowly draining her. 3 other Vexthor officers flanked her, their expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. She acknowledged Hawk's arrival with a nod. Colonel Harrison, your tactical expertise is required. Commander Kale, show him. The holographic display shifted, zooming out to show local space around Earth. 3 contacts appeared at the system's edge, their signatures different from Vexthor vessels. Larger, more angular, moving with purpose toward the inner system. Krill, Kale's voice carried the weight of old hatred. 3 warships, they maintain position just beyond your planet's orbital space. They have not responded to our hails beyond a single message. What message? Hawk studied the display, his tactical training automatically assessing threat vectors and defensive options. Zyra touched a control. A voice filled the chamber, alien in cadence, but speaking English with mechanical precision. We are aware of the hybrid. We wish to observe. We will not interfere unless threatened. The chamber fell silent. Hawk processed implications while the Vexthor officers waited for his response. The Krill had been Zyra's enemy for 50 years. Their sudden appearance near Earth couldn't be coincidence. His voice came measured, pulling from lessons learned in coalition warfare. When you're facing unknown intentions, assume nothing. They say observation could be truth, could be reconnaissance before attack. What's their historical pattern? One of the Vexthor officers spoke, his voice thick with suspicion. They lie. Krill always lie. This is reconnaissance before attack. Or it's exactly what they said. In Desert Storm, we learn not every movement is hostile. Sometimes surveillance is just surveillance. Hawk turned to Zyra. What do you know about their intelligence capabilities? Could they have detected the pregnancy? Zyra's expression carried calculation. Our physicians use encrypted medical scans. But if the child generates unique energy signatures, it is possible. Then maybe they're telling the truth about observation. Question is, why do they care about a hybrid child? Hawk studied the Krill ship positions. They're not in attack formation. They're in surveillance pattern, textbook peacetime monitoring. The Queen's slight smile carried approval. You suggest we respond diplomatically rather than prepare for battle. Suggest we do both. Answer their message. Ask what their interest is. Meanwhile, Kael runs defensive drills and we update tactical posture. That way we're ready regardless of their intentions. The meeting continued for 2 hours. Hawk worked with Kael, mapping the ship's defensive systems, identifying overlapping fields of fire, suggesting improvements based on coalition tactics. The Vexthor warrior listened with the attention of someone who recognized competence regardless of its source. As they worked, Kael spoke quietly. You have commanded troops in battle. Once. Long time ago. Different war? Different planet, same basic problems. The Queen trusts you. Kael's statement carried observation rather than question. This is unusual. She has not trusted anyone fully since the war ended. Maybe she's just desperate. Hawk adjusted a holographic representation of defensive layers, tightening response patterns in ways that felt natural from decades of training. Desperation does not create trust, only necessity. Kael studied the changes Hawk had made, nodding slow approval. You have improved our defensive efficiency by 14% with these modifications. Where did you learn this place called Kafji? 1991. We held position against Iraqi Republican Guard for 3 days with inadequate supplies and no reinforcements. Learned a lot about making less do more. Something like respect crossed Kael's features. Survival with inadequate resources. A warrior's true test. The Queen chose well when she chose you. She didn't choose me. I volunteered. Same result. Different pride. The Vexthor warrior's observation carried enough weight that Hawk didn't argue. The Krill response arrived 18 hours later. Hawk was in his quarters when the ship's communication system activated. Zyra's voice carried through the crystal Colonel Harrison to the tactical center immediately. He arrived to find the command staff already assembled. The holographic display showed the same 3 Krill ships, but now a 4th element had appeared, a data packet dense with information transmitted on frequencies that apparently carried significance Hawk didn't understand. Zyra's face held shock. Her usual composure cracked by whatever the message contained. They sent us the prophecy of union. The complete text, including portions we believed lost. Hawk moved closer to the display, where alien script scrolled through translations. What does it say? She touched a control, bringing forward specific passages. When warrior of earth breeds with Silver Queen, the child shall bridge eternal war. 2 who fought shall become one. Her voice dropped, reading words that carried weight of millennia. The half-born carries genetic keys to reunite divided peoples. She will be the hope that war denied. The masculine pronouns shifted to feminine partway through, she. The prophecy spoke of a daughter. The Krill know. One of the officers spoke, voice carrying wonder and alarm in equal measure. They know about the hybrid's gender. They know things we have not yet confirmed ourselves. How another officer's question hung in the stunned silence. Hawk's tactical mind worked through possibilities, finding the answer that made terrible sense. Because they have the same prophecy. Because this wasn't just about Vexthor, it was about them too. Zyra met his eyes across the holographic display, understanding passing between them. The Krill and Vexthor were not always enemies. Ancient records suggest we shared origin. A genetic split that created 2 species from one. The war was not between strangers, but between siblings. Family fights always run deepest. Hawke had seen it in enough conflicts, the way blood feuds burned hotter than strategic ones. And this prophecy, it says the child reunites what was split. If interpreted literally, yes. Zyra's hand trembled slightly as she touched the holographic text. Our daughter would carry DNA capable of bridging the genetic divide. She would be proof that reunion is possible. The tactical implications crashed over Hawke like cold water. This wasn't just about Vexthor's succession or alliance with Earth. This was about ending a war that had defined two civilizations for centuries. And his daughter, their daughter, was supposedly the key. No pressure. His voice carried black humor born from decades of impossible situations. Just solving a multi-civilization conflict before she's old enough to walk. Zyra almost smiled. You handle galaxy-altering prophecies with remarkable calm. Handled worse odds with less preparation. This is just bigger scale. The moment broke when alarms shrieked through the tactical center. Red light bathed the chamber as displays shifted to show internal security feeds. Voran's face appeared on the main screen, his expression carrying triumph and contempt in equal measure. The general's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. Loyal Vexthor, your queen carries an abomination that threatens everything we are. I call for immediate vote of no confidence. Those who stand with purity, with tradition, with the true future of our people, stand with me now. The display shifted to show troop movements throughout the ship. Sections going dark as Voran's supporters seized control. 40% of the military, he'd said. Hawke watched that prediction manifest in real time as corridor after corridor fell to the rebellion. Zyra's face went hard. Royal authority, displacing any vulnerability, sealed the tactical center. All loyal forces fall back to Central Citadel. This is now a siege situation. Hawke's mind shifted automatically into combat mode, decades of training, overriding shock. How many troops do we have? 800 loyal warriors. Kael's response came clipped, professional. Voran commands approximately 5,000. He has numerical superiority and control of outer ship sections. Then we consolidate. Pull back to defensible positions, layer our forces, make him pay for every meter. Hawke moved to the tactical display, his hands already sketching defensive arrangements. Numbers don't mean victory if the smaller force holds the right ground and maintains discipline. You wish to apply Earth tactics to ship defense. One of the officers sounded skeptical. I wish to survive until circumstances change. That's what tactics are, buying time and making the enemy pay for it. Hawke met Zyra's eyes. Your Majesty, we need to move you to the most secure location on this ship. You're the primary target. I am also the queen. I do not hide while my warriors fight. Her voice carried absolute authority, the kind that came from leading fleets into battle. With respect, you're pregnant and weakened. You can't fight effectively, but you can command effectively from a protected position. That's not hiding, that's tactics. The logic reached her, visible in the way her expression shifted from defiance to calculation. Very well, but I will not be separated from command capabilities. If I retreat to where I can still lead. Agreed, now move. We've got maybe 20 minutes before Voran's forces reach Central Citadel. The next 3 hours blurred into organized chaos. Hawke worked alongside Kael, positioning loyal troops in layered defensive patterns, creating overlapping fields of fire, establishing fallback positions that turned every corridor into a killing ground. The Vexthor warriors followed his instructions with disciplined precision, recognizing competence, even when it came from an alien who shouldn't understand their technology. But Hawke understood warfare, understood that plasma rifles work like any ranged weapon: line of sight, rate of fire, ammunition management. Understood that corridors created choke points, that high ground provided advantage, that discipline under fire mattered more than individual courage. They evacuated Zyra to the medical bay, the most heavily reinforced location in Central Citadel. She wanted to stay in the tactical center, but Hawke had convinced her that the medical equipment she needed for the hybrid's survival made the med bay the logical choice. Hard to argue against logic when biology enforced it. Lieutenant Hayes contacted him via the hidden communicator during a brief respite, her voice tight with concern. Hawke, NASA is tracking energy signatures consistent with weapons fire on that ship. What's happening? Civil war. Keep this channel open but stay clear. If we need extraction, I'll signal. Sir, we can. Negative. You engage and this becomes an interstellar incident. Humans stay out unless I say otherwise. Harrison out. He killed the channel before she could argue. Hayes was smart enough to follow orders even when she disagreed. That was a gift in subordinates. KL found him checking defensive positions on Deck 7, the corridor he designated as the primary killing ground. Voron's forces are moving up from lower decks. Estimate 20 minutes until first contact. Troops positioned, all defensive layers active. We are as ready as limited numbers allow. The Vexthor warrior paused, then added, "You have done this before. Led desperate defenses, once or twice." Hawk checked his plasma rifle's charged muscle memory from 100 weapons inspections applying to alien technology. "You trust your warriors with my life. They are veterans of the Krill War. They do not break. Then we've got a chance. Voron's got numbers, but we've got position and motivation. Same principles that won Desert Storm apply here. Superior tactics beats superior numbers." The first plasma bolt screamed past 30 seconds later. Voron's forces came fast and aggressive, trying to overwhelm through speed and firepower. They hit the outer defensive layer and died in overlapping fire lanes Hawk had designed specifically to create maximum casualties with minimum exposure. The body count rose. Vexthor fell on both sides, silver blood on crystal floors, the ship's beauty scarred by conflict it wasn't meant to contain. Hawk fired with mechanical precision, targeting threats, maintaining fire discipline. His mind in that cold tactical space where emotion couldn't interfere with survival. A young warrior couldn't have been more than 19 in Vexthor years, took a plasma bolt meant for Hawk. The kid died quickly, purple eyes going dark, last words in a language Hawk didn't speak but understood anyway. "Protect the Queen. Protect the future." Hawk returned to the fight without pause. No time for grief, no space for guilt. Those came later in the hours between battles when you counted the kit and lived with arithmetic. They held the first defensive layer for 40 minutes before pulling back to the second. Casualties: 23 loyal warriors killed, 16 wounded. Enemy casualties estimated 87. The math favored them tactically but not strategically. Voron could afford to trade bodies. They couldn't. The second layer held for an hour, then the third. Each fighting withdrawal precisely timed each fallback, costing Voron's forces more than they could afford despite their numbers. Hawk's tactics, learned in desert sands 34 years ago, translated perfectly to crystalline corridors. Warfare adapted, but fundamentals remained constant. By the time they reached the final defensive position outside the medical bay, they'd been fighting for 7 hours. Hawk's hands were steady, but his body was wearing down. 62-year-old flesh and bone, pushed beyond reasonable limits by adrenaline and necessity. Kyle moved beside him, the Vexthor warrior's armor scarred by near misses. "We have maintained position, but casualties mount. Perhaps 20 minutes before Voron masses forces for final push. Then we make these 20 minutes count." Hawk reloaded his plasma rifle, the motion automatic now. "Ready for one more stand." "Always." Kale's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd accepted death long ago and kept fighting anyway. Voron's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "Colonel Harrison, you fight well for a human, but you cannot win. Surrender now and I will allow you to return to Earth. My quarrel is not with you." Hawk triggered his own communicator, speaking so the entire ship could hear. "General, my quarrel is with anyone who threatens pregnant women and children." That's pretty much universal. "So no, we're going to keep making you bleed until you run out of troops or motivation. Then you die with her." Noble but pointless. Maybe. But I've had worse last stands. At least this one's for something that matters. KL's expression held something like admiration. "You truly do not fear death." "Feared it plenty when I was young. Experience teaches you death's just another problem to solve. The trick is making the other guys solve it first." The 20 minutes passed in tense readiness. Hawk used the time to redistribute ammunition, check defensive positions, make sure every warrior knew their role and their fallback point. The familiar routine of pre-combat preparation, timeless and strangely comforting. He was finalizing the defensive arrangement when the alarm changed pitch. Not the steady wail of internal conflict, but a shrieking pattern that meant external threat. The tactical displays in the medical bay showed new contacts appearing. The 3 Krill ships had moved, not toward Earth, toward the Vexthor vessel, moving with purpose and speed that suggested intention beyond observation. Zyra struggled to sit up in the medical bay, her weakened condition evident in the effort required. What are they doing? Hawk studied the display, his tactical mind, processing movement patterns. Either they're attacking or they're intervening. The communications system crackled with a new voice mechanically precise but carrying weight. Nonetheless, Vexthor vessel. This is Krill Command. We have detected internal conflict aboard your ship. The prophecy child must survive. Stand down your rebel forces or we will disable them. The medical bay fell silent. Every warrior present understood the implications. The Krill ancient enemies had just threatened to intervene in a Vexthor civil war. On behalf of the hybrid, Voron's voice responded, fury and disbelief mixing. This is internal Vexthor matter. You have no authority. We have the authority of prophecy that predates both our civilizations. The child represents hope for peace between our peoples. Anyone threatening that hope becomes our enemy. You have 60 seconds to cease hostile action. Hawk watched the tactical display as the Krill ships positioned themselves with precision that spoke to military excellence. Their weapon systems activated, locking onto specific sections of the Vexthor vessel, the sections Voron's forces occupied. 30 seconds passed in silence. 40, 50. At 58 seconds, the Krill fired. Not weapons meant to destroy, but some kind of disabling technology. The sections under Voron's control went dark power systems shutting down weapons offline. 5,000 troops suddenly reduced to hand-to-hand capabilities against an enemy they couldn't reach. Voron's voice came through one final time, stripped of triumph, retreat. All forces retreat to lower decks. This is not finished. The corridor outside the medical bay fell quiet. No plasma fire, no charging warriors, just the hum of ship systems and the sound of exhausted breathing. Kale lowered his weapon slowly. They saved us. The Krill saved us. Hawk's mind was already moving past shock toward tactical assessment. They bought us time. Voron still got forces, and he's still motivated. This isn't over. But they sided with the prophecy, with the child. Zyra's voice carried wonder and confusion. Why? Because they believe, or because they see strategic advantage. Does it matter? Hawk moved to the medical bay window, looking out at space where Krill ships maintain position. They just made a choice. Now we need to figure out what comes next. What came next was Zyra screaming. The sound cut through post-battle calm like plasma fire primal, and terrified in ways queens weren't supposed to be. Hawk spun to find her doubled over, gripping the medical platform with desperate strength. The physician rushed forward, scanners active, his expression shifting from concern to alarm, the stress of combat. The child is coming? Now, Hawk's stomach dropped. Now, it's only been 4 weeks. 4 Vexthor weeks, equivalent to 6 Earth months. The hybrid develops at accelerated pace. She is coming, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. Zyra's eyes found Hawk's through pain, carrying trust and terror. Day. Please do not leave me alone for this. He moved to her side without conscious decision, his hand finding hers. Not going anywhere. We're in this together now. Outside the medical bay, Krill ships maintained their vigil. Voron's forces regrouped in darkness. The ship hung in space above Earth, holding ancient prophecy and impossible hope in its crystalline chambers. And in the medical bay, surrounded by technology beyond understanding and guarded by warriors from another world, James Harrison prepared to meet his daughter, while plasma burns still cooled on the corridors outside. The medical bay had emergency power, only casting everything in dim red luminescence that made the blood on Hawk's hands look black. Dr. Chen crouched on the opposite side of the medical platform, his NASA medical training suddenly critical, as alien biology prepared to do something that shouldn't be possible. Zyra's breathing came in controlled gasps, warrior discipline, fighting against physiology. Her silver skin had gone translucent, showing veins beneath that pulsed with colors human anatomy didn't produce. The hybrid was coming fast, 4 weeks of compressed gestation reaching its violent conclusion. The Vexthor physician worked with equipment that had lost half its functionality when Voron cut power to this section. Crystal displays flickered, diagnostic tools operating on backup systems that weren't designed for emergency childbirth during Civil War. His 6-fingered hands moved with practiced speed, but his expression carried naked fear. Hawk gripped Zyra's hand, feeling bones that were both familiar and alien grinding together as another contraction hit. Her purple eyes locked onto his, searching for something, strength, reassurance, distraction from the reality that this might kill her. His voice came low, meant only for her ears. Breathe with me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus on my voice, not the pain. She followed his rhythm, her breathing synchronizing with his, the simple act of shared breath creating connections stronger than words. Another contraction. Her back arched, a sound escaping that no queen should make. Vulnerable, raw, human in all the ways that mattered. Dr. Chen's voice cut through with clinical precision. The child's position is wrong. Breach presentation. We need to turn it, or we lose them both. The Vexthor physician finished the thought. Neither wanted to speak aloud. His hands moved to Zyra's abdomen, pressing with techniques Hawk didn't understand but recognized as desperate. Outside the medical bay, plasma fire resumed. Sporadic, probing attacks from Voron's forces, testing the darkened corridors, searching for weaknesses. Commander Kael's voice crackled through damaged communicators, calling defensive positions, managing a siege with dwindling resources. Zyra screamed again. Not pain, though. Pain was clearly part of it, but rage at vulnerability, at timing, at circumstances that forced her to give birth during combat, when every instinct said, fight or flee. Her hand crushed Hawk's with strength that should have broken bones. The Vexthor physician's expression shifted from fear to focus. The child turns. She responds to external pressure. Dr. Chen maintained position. Colonel Harrison, you must keep the queen calm. Her stress hormones are affecting the infant. Calm during childbirth in a war zone with the power out. Sure. Simple. Hawk moved closer, his free hand finding Zyra's face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You commanded fleets through 50 years of war. You survived battles that killed thousands. This is just another battle. Different enemies, same principles. You breathe, you focus, you win. Her laugh came breathless and bitter. I cannot shoot my way through childbirth. No, but you can outlast it. You don't fight the pain, you accept it, move through it, come out the other side. The pain means you're still alive to feel it. Philosophy during labor. How romantic. But her breathing steadied her grip, shifting from panicked crushing to controlled pressure. Dr. Chen spoke without looking up from his position, dilation complete. The child is properly positioned now. Your Majesty, when the next contraction comes, you need to push. The contraction hit like plasma fire. Zyra pushed with everything she had, warrior strength channeled into creation instead of destruction. Hawk held her hand and counted seconds, time stretching into subjective eternity, the way it did in combat when everything happened simultaneously, too fast and too slow. 15 minutes. 30. An hour. The medical bay became a universe unto itself, all existence compressed into the space between contractions, the moments of effort, the desperate hope that the next push would be the last. Plasma fire erupted closer. The medical bay doors, reinforced but not impenetrable, that shuddered under sustained weapons fire. Voron's forces had pushed through Kael's defensive positions. The final barrier was failing. Hawk's mind split between two realities. One hand holding Zyra's, one eye on the door, calculating how long until breach, whether he could reach a weapon in time, whether he'd have to choose between defending his daughter and staying beside the woman giving birth to her. Kael's voice came through damaged speakers. Medical bay, they are breaking through. 60 seconds until containment fails. The Vexthor physician looked up, his expression carrying the weight of impossible choices. The child crowns. Perhaps 2 more contractions. We need 3 minutes we do not have. Then we buy 3 minutes. Hawk released Zyra's hand, carefully moving toward the weapons locker near the entrance. His body protested, 62 years old, 7 hours of combat behind him. Exhaustion down to the bone, but duty didn't care about comfort. Zyra's voice stopped him, commanding despite pain, James, do not leave me. Not now. The door began to buckle. Through the gap, Hawk could see Voron's warriors' weapons raised, preparing final assault. 30 seconds. 20. Dr. Chen spoke without pausing his work. I can deliver the child. She needs you to defend her. Hawk stood frozen between two duties. Two needs, the kind of choice that had no good answer. The door exploded inward. 3 of Voron's warriors poured through, plasma rifles raised, targeting the medical platform where Zyra lay helpless. Hawk moved on, instinct, no weapon, just his body between threat and vulnerability. The first warrior's rifle swung toward him. Too slow. Hawk closed distance hand-to-hand techniques from decades of training translating into action. Disarm, strike, drop. The second warrior fired. Plasma grazed Hawk's shoulder, burning through fabric and flesh with heat that made him smell his own tissue cooking. Pain later, survive first. He grabbed the fallen warrior's rifle, brought it up, fired twice. Center mass. The warrior fell. The third hesitated, caught between orders to kill the queen and survival instinct facing a human who shouldn't be able to move this fast. That hesitation cost him. Hawk fired again. 3 bodies on the medical bay floor, smoke rising from plasma burns. Behind him, Zyra screamed. Not pain this time. Relief, triumph. The particular sound of something finished that couldn't be unfinished. Hawk turned to see Dr. Chen lifting a small form, slick and impossibly fragile skin that showed both silver and bronze undertones. The baby's mouth opened. No sound at first. Then a wail that carried frequencies both human and alien, a voice that existed in the space between species. The Vexthor physician moved with swift efficiency, clearing airways, checking vitals, his fear giving way to wonder. She lives. The hybrid lives. This should not be possible, but she lives. Hawk lowered the plasma rifle, the weapon suddenly impossibly heavy. His daughter. The concept existed in his head, but couldn't quite connect to the screaming bundle Dr. Chen was cleaning with practiced movements. Zyra reached with exhausted arms, the universal gesture of mother wanting child. Chen placed the baby gently against her chest. The infant's wailing stopped immediately, some primal recognition that this silver-skinned being meant safety. Hawk moved closer, his burned shoulder throbbing with every heartbeat. The baby's eyes opened, not the unfocused gaze of human newborns, but clear awareness, intelligent and impossibly ancient. Green eyes, not purple like Zyra's, not brown like his. Green like new growth, like hope, like something neither species had contributed, but both had created together. The baby's hand reached toward him, tiny fingers spreading. Without thinking, Hawk extended his own hand, calloused and scarred and still trembling from combat. The tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and the universe opened. Images flooded his mind, not words, but pure information concepts that bypassed language entirely. He saw civilizations rising and falling, saw Vexthor and Krill locked in eternal conflict, saw Earth from orbit fragile and beautiful, and hanging on the edge of something vast. He saw Michael, his son at 24 in his Marine uniform, smiling the way he had smiled before Afghanistan took him. But not memory, something else, something that felt like Michael's presence, reassuring him that this choice, this sacrifice, this impossible situation had meaning beyond survival. The connection broke. Hawk staggered, Dr. Chen catching him before he fell. The baby returned to making small sounds against Zyra's chest, appearing perfectly normal, as if she hadn't just performed telepathy on her father. Zyra's voice came weak but certain. She has the gift. The ancient text spoke of this. Hybrid children who can bridge minds as well as genetics. Great. My daughter's psychic. Hawk's voice came rougher than intended, shock and wonder fighting for dominance. She just showed me everything, including my dead son. She showed you what you needed to see. Zyra's hand found his uninjured shoulder. To reassure you that this path has purpose. Before Hawk could respond, the baby's eyes began to glow. Soft golden light pulsing in rhythm with her breathing, her tiny hand lifted, pointing toward the medical bay's far wall. The gesture carrying insistence, demand the kind of imperative that transcended age. The Vexthor physician followed the infant's gesture, his expression shifting to confusion. There is nothing in that direction except old storage. Sections sealed for 2,000 years. The baby's glow intensified. Zyra spoke softly. She wants us to follow, to go there. Your Majesty, you cannot walk. You just gave birth during combat. Dr. Chen's medical training overrode everything else. But the Queen was already moving determination, overriding exhaustion, the baby cradled against her chest. If my daughter commands it, we go. Commander Kale appeared in the doorway, his armor scorched from sustained fire. The Krill ships have created a protective barrier. Voron's forces have fallen back temporarily. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they regroup. Then we use those 10 minutes. Hawk grabbed medical supplies, wrapping his burned shoulder with the efficiency of someone who treated his own wounds before. Kale, you're with us. Everyone else hold this position. They moved through corridors lit only by emergency systems, following the baby's insistent gestures. Three rights, two lefts down, maintenance passages that hadn't seen use in centuries. The ship's architecture shifted in these older sections, crystal formations, more organic, less refined than the newer areas. The baby's glow led them to a door that had been sealed with technology beyond Hawk's understanding. No visible controls, no handles, just smooth crystal that had fused into a single impenetrable barrier. Zyra stepped close, the baby in her arms reaching toward the seal. When those tiny fingers made contact, light spread from the touch point, tracing patterns that might have been writing in a language older than either parent's civilization. The door opened, not sliding or dilating, but simply ceasing to exist, crystal rearranging its molecular structure to create passage where none had been. Beyond lay a chamber that hurt to perceive. Geometry that existed in more dimensions than human eyes were meant to process. At the center, a holographic projection system activated, automatically responding to the hybrid child's presence. Images filled the space. Two species similar in form, working together to build something magnificent. Cities that stretched to clouds. Ships that crossed galaxies. A civilization united in purpose and achievement. Then fracture. Disagreement that became argument that became violence. The images showed war, brutal and total, two factions of the same people tearing each other apart. Weapons that destroyed planets, battles that lasted decades, the kind of conflict that didn't end with surrender, but with mutual exhaustion. The hologram shifted, showing the aftermath. Two species where one had been. Vexthor and Krill divided by choices made millennia ago, genetics altered by time and separation, until they could no longer recognize their shared origin. The ancient text appeared, holographic symbols translating into English as Hawk watched. In the 2000th cycle, when war has consumed too much of what we were, the bridge shall be born. Not of our people, but of people yet unknown. The child of three worlds shall carry the key to reunion in her very DNA. The prophecy continued, detailing genetic sequences that meant nothing to Hawk but clearly resonated with the Vexthor physician. The doctor moved closer to the hologram, studying the information with growing wonder. It shows how to reverse the genetic split. The hybrid child carries dormant sequences from both Vexthor and Krill lineages. She is not merely a bridge. She is the cure to our division. Zyra's voice held layers of emotion Hawk couldn't fully parse. 2,000 years. We have fought for 2,000 years because our ancestors could not resolve their differences. And the solution was always to look beyond ourselves. To find someone different enough that the reunion could begin from outside. Hawk understood suddenly why the Krill had intervened, why they'd protected the hybrid. This wasn't about politics or alliance. This was about survival of both species, reunion of a people torn in half by ancient pride. The chamber trembled, not from weapons fire, but from something deeper, structural. Voron's voice boomed through ship-wide communications, no longer controlled or confident, but desperate and enraged. You wish to unite with Krill. You wish to destroy everything. Vexthor has become. Then I destroy it myself. Self-destruct has been activated. 5 minutes until total ship annihilation. The holographic display shifted to show countdown timers throughout the vessel. 4 minutes, 50 seconds, 49, 48. Commander Kael's expression went flat with shock. The self-destruct requires command codes from the bridge. Voron must have taken the reactor control room. Where is it? Hawk's mind shifted into tactical mode, personal revelation, shelved in favor of immediate survival. Deck 50. We are on deck 10. Kael's voice carried hopelessness. We cannot reach it in time. Hawk looked at his daughter, still glowing softly in Zyra's exhausted arms. Looked at the holographic display showing a prophecy 2,000 years in the making. Looked at the woman he had volunteered to help and somehow ended up dying beside. Then we better run fast. The journey up 40 decks became a nightmare of emergency ladders and disabled lifts, Hawk half carrying Zyra while she clutched their daughter Kael and the physician, clearing the path ahead. The countdown echoed in Hawk's head. 3 minutes. 2:30. 2. They emerged on deck 50 to find Voron's final defensive position. 20 warriors armed and positioned to kill anyone approaching reactor control. Behind them, visible through reinforced crystal, Voron himself stood at the control panel, his hand resting on the final activation sequence. 1 minute 40 seconds. Hawk raised his plasma rifle, knowing the math didn't work. 20 against 4 with Zyra weakened and carrying the baby. Suicide math. The kind of equation that ended with everyone dead except maybe Vorin, who'd die last watching his purity burn. The Krill ships arrived materialized isn't the right word, but they were suddenly their quantum displacement technology, putting them between the reactor room and open space. Their beam weapons didn't fire. Instead, a single transmission came through every speaker on the ship. The voice carried mechanical precision, but underneath Hawk heard emotion. General Vorin, we are Krill Command. We have observed your actions. We understand your fear of change. But the prophecy child carries hope for both our peoples. We will not allow that hope to die from pride. Vorin's laugh echoed harsh and broken. The Krill lecture me about pride, you who fought us for 50 years. You who would see us weakened and conquered. We who are your siblings. We who share your origin and your pain. The hologram in the ancient chamber displays truth you have not seen. Vexthor and Krill were one people. The war was not between strangers but family. And family wars end only when someone chooses peace over pride. 1 minute. The general's hand hovered over the final activation. His face showed layers of conflict, duty, and fear, conviction, and doubt, the weight of beliefs challenged by evidence he couldn't deny. If I activate this, we all die. Vexthor, purity preserved through extinction. Or you step back. You let the child live. You let hope exist, even if you cannot yet believe in it. Hawk's voice carried across the distance, loud enough for everyone to hear. I watched good men surrender in Desert Storm. Watched them choose life over dying for a cause they'd stopped believing in. That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. 45 seconds. I have fought too long. Vorin's voice cracked, decades of certainty fracturing. I do not remember what I fight for anymore. Only that stopping means admitting the deaths were meaningless. The deaths only become meaningless if we make the same mistakes our ancestors did. Zyra stepped forward, baby cradled against her chest, exhaustion and determination mixing in her bearing. You were my finest general. I know you loved Vexthor enough to fight 50 years. Love it enough now to let it evolve. 30 seconds. The USS Ronald Reagan's signature appeared on long-range sensors, its escort ships moving into position. Lieutenant Hayes' voice crackled over military channels. Colonel Harrison, we are in position to provide fire support. Just give the word. Negative. Stand by. This has to end different. Hawk kept his rifle pointed at Vorin, but his finger off the trigger. General, you gave the order to retreat rather than slaughter wounded warriors. That's not the action of a fanatic. That's a soldier who still remembers what honor means. 20 seconds. Vorin's hand trembled. His 20 loyal warriors watched him, waiting for the command that would end everything or save it. The weight of 2 civilizations hung on one exhausted general's choice. At 10 seconds, Vorin stepped back from the control panel. At 5 seconds, he deactivated the self-destruct. At 3 seconds, he fell to his knees, the weight of 50 years of war finally crushing him. I have forgotten why I fight. I only know I cannot fight anymore. The silence that followed held a quality beyond sound. It was the silence of war's ending, of choices made that couldn't be unmade, of the moment when destruction becomes survival because someone found courage to stop. Kale moved forward carefully, weapons still ready, not trusting the peace yet. His warriors secured the reactor room, disarming Vorin's troops, who surrendered without resistance. The fight had gone out of them when their general knelt. Hawk lowered his rifle, the weapon suddenly too heavy to hold. His legs wanted to give out, adrenaline crash hitting like a physical blow. Zyra moved beside him, her free hand finding his arm. The 3 of them, mother, father, daughter, standing together while the universe rearranged itself around them. The trial took place 6 hours later, after medical teams had treated the wounded and started counting the dead. The throne room had been cleared of debris, crystal walls repaired by Vexthor technology that could restructure matter. The aesthetic beauty concealed the cost: 147 loyal warriors, dead 300 wounded. Vorin's forces had lost twice that. The council assembled those officers and officials who'd remained loyal or neutral during the Civil War. They sat in judgment of their former general while he stood at attention in the center of the throne room, stripped of rank insignia, a warrior awaiting sentence. Zyra presided from her throne, the baby sleeping in a crystalline cradle beside her, protected by guards who'd proven their loyalty in blood. Hawk stood to her right, officially recognized as the child's father, and therefore holding status in Vexthor hierarchy he'd neither asked for nor knew how to use. The charges were read in Vexthor formal language, translated by Commander Kael for the humans present. Treason, attempted regicide, incitement to civil war, murder of loyal warriors, attempted genocide through ship destruction, each charge carrying death penalty under military law. When the recitation finished, Zyra spoke with voice that carried royal authority tempered by exhaustion. General Vorin, you commanded my forces through the final decade of the Krill War. You saved countless lives through tactical brilliance. You served with honor for 40 years before this day. How does a warrior of your caliber fall so far? Vorin's response came quiet but unflinching. I watched the war consume our best people. Watched warriors die for peace we could not achieve. When the armistice came, I thought we had failed them. That their deaths meant nothing unless we remained pure, remained separate, remained what they had died defending. And the hybrid child threatened that purity. Zyra's statement carried understanding rather than accusation. She is everything the war said was impossible. Unity with those we fought. Peace with those who killed our warriors. If she can exist, if she can be the bridge the prophecy describes, then perhaps the war was the mistake, and their deaths were for nothing. Or perhaps their deaths were the price we paid to learn we could not continue as we were. Hawke's voice cut through the formal proceedings' military directness, bypassing diplomatic nuance. General, I lost my son in Afghanistan. Could spend the rest of my life angry that he died for a war that didn't end clean. Or I could accept that his sacrifice gave us the chance to choose different. Not make their deaths meaningless, but make our future worth what they paid. Vorin's eyes met Hawke's warrior, recognizing warrior across the gulf of species. You speak truth. I did not wish to hear. Zyra delivered judgment with voice that carried finality. General Vorin, you merit death under military law. But death serves no purpose except revenge. You will be stripped of rank, reduced to private, and assigned to serve under Commander Kael for the next 20 standard years. If you prove loyal, if you work to rebuild what you sought to destroy, your rank will be restored. This is mercy tempered with justice. Do you accept? Vorin knelt fully, the gesture of Vexthor's submission. I accept, Your Majesty, and I apologize for betraying the trust you placed in me. The council affirmed the judgment. Vorin was led away by guards who treated him with respect despite his crimes. The trial ended not with execution, but with the possibility of redemption. When the throne room cleared, Hawke found himself alone with Zyra and the baby. The infant had woken those impossible green eyes, studying him with awareness that shouldn't exist in hours-old children. Zyra spoke softly. She needs a name. In Vexthor tradition, both parents choose together. Hawke looked at his daughter, seeing echoes of the sun he'd lost in the curve of her face, seeing hope in features that belonged to neither species completely. I had a son, Michael. He died protecting others because that's what mattered. Your daughter, our daughter. She's here because people chose protection over destruction. Seems fitting to honor that, Michael, in human language. But we need the Vexthor translation for official records. Zyra's fingers moved across a holographic interface, linguistic databases scrolling past. In our tongue, the closest equivalent is Mixael. It means one who brings light to darkness. Then Mixael. Hawke tested the name, foreign syllables becoming familiar through repetition. Mixael Harrison Vexthor. The baby responded to her name, golden light pulsing beneath her bronze-silver skin. Her hand reached toward both parents, tiny fingers spreading as if to encompass them, both in whatever telepathic space she occupied. The ceremony took place 3 days later, once medical teams had cleared everyone as stable and diplomatic protocols had been satisfied. Earth orbit played host to something unprecedented. Vexthor and Krill ships positioned side by side, no weapons active, no hostile posturing. The USS Ronald Reagan maintained position at respectful distance, representing humanity's awkward introduction to galactic politics. The throne room had been transformed into ceremonial space crystal walls, programmed to display both Vexthor and Krill iconography. Representatives from both civilizations stood in careful arrangement, warriors who'd fought each other for decades now sharing the same chamber. Zyra held Mixael, the baby, dressed in ceremonial robes that combined human Vexthor and Krill design elements. Hawke stood beside them in his marine dress blues, the uniform feeling simultaneously appropriate and ridiculous for an event that transcended species. The Krill ambassador, a being similar to Vexthor, but with more angular features and darker coloring, spoke first, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of translation technology. We acknowledge the child, Mixael Harrison Vexthor. She carries genetic hope for both our peoples. The war that divided us for 2,000 years can end through her existence. Zyra responded with formal authority. The Vexthor Empire accepts responsibility for nurturing this hope. We will protect her, teach her, prepare her for the role prophecy has assigned, and we will not hide her from the universe. The Krill Ambassador's addition carried weight. She belongs to both our peoples and to humanity. Let all three species share in raising her. The ceremony continued with rituals Hawk didn't fully understand but participated in because his daughter deserved witnesses to her existence. When it concluded, when representatives from three civilizations had acknowledged Mixael as symbol of possible peace, Lieutenant Hayes approached with Ambassador Walsh. The diplomat looked older than when this had started. 3 weeks ago, weight of historic responsibility showing in new lines around his eyes. Colonel Harrison, the president, has asked me to extend formal recognition of your unique situation. You're being listed as first ambassador to the Vexthor Krill Alliance effective immediately. Congratulations on your promotion and your daughter. Hawk studied Walsh's expression, reading the unspoken question behind diplomatic language. You're asking if I'm staying. I'm asking if you want to come home. Hayes spoke before Walsh could respond, her voice carrying layers of concern and understanding. Sir, you've done enough. More than enough. You can return to Earth, be part of your daughter's life, without living on an alien ship. The choice hung in the air between them. Return to Earth, resume fixing shuttles, visit his daughter through diplomatic channels, while trying to bridge two universes with weekly video calls. Safe, familiar, reasonable, or stay. Remain in a crystalline ship orbiting Earth, raise Mixael, surrounded by warriors and prophecies, become something beyond what 62 years of life had prepared him for. Hawk looked at Zyra holding their daughter, looked at the Krill and Vexthor representatives attempting awkward conversation, two enemies learning to coexist through sheer necessity. Looked at Lieutenant Hayes, young and competent, representing the world he'd come from. Lieutenant, tell NASA I'm staying. Hawk's voice carried certainty that surprised him. Tell them I'm on permanent diplomatic assignment. Tell them I found something worth being here for. Hayes smiled despite obvious disappointment. Yes, sir. But you better keep the comm channel open. I'm going to want regular updates on my favorite niece. After they departed, after the ceremony concluded and representatives returned to their ships, Hawk found himself alone with Zyra in the private chambers where this had begun. Mixael slept in her crystalline cradle, golden light pulsing softly with each breath. Zyra spoke quietly. You chose to stay. Not because you were trapped, not because I demanded it, but because you wished to. Stay because someone has to teach Mixael about stubbornness and how to hold impossible positions against overwhelming odds. Hawk moved closer to the cradle, watching his daughter sleep. Stay because you're going to need help managing an empire and a hybrid child and whatever diplomatic nightmare comes from trying to merge three civilizations. Stay because this is where I'm needed, even when it costs you your world, especially then. That's when it matters most. Zyra's hand found his fingers intertwining across the space between species. I love you, James Harrison. I did not expect to. I did not plan to. But you stayed when you could have run. You fought when you could have surrendered. You chose us when the rational choice was yourself. Hawk turned to face her, fully seeing the woman behind the crown, the warrior behind the queen. And I love you, Zyra. Don't know when it happened. Somewhere between the transfusions and the Civil War, and watching you give birth during plasma fire. But here we are. Their kiss carried weight of everything survived, everything chosen, everything still to come. When it ended, they stood together looking at their daughter, while Earth rotated below and alien ships maintained vigil overhead. 6 months later, the Intergalactic Alliance Treaty was signed aboard a neutral station constructed specifically for the purpose. Vexthor Krill and United Nations representatives each contributed to the station's design architecture that blended three civilizations into something unprecedented. Hawk attended in marine dress blues with diplomatic credentials that still felt surreal. First Ambassador. The title meant representing humanity in negotiations with beings who'd mastered faster than light travel when humans were still discovering agriculture. Mixael, 6 months old, but developing with the accelerated pace that characterized her hybrid biology, sat in Zyra's arms, observing the proceedings with those impossible green eyes. She looked 3 years old in human terms, understood language from all three species, and had started using her telepathic abilities with enough control that she no longer accidentally projected images into everyone's minds. The treaty's signing proceeded with appropriate ceremony. Diplomatic language that promised cooperation, cultural exchange, mutual defense, all the careful phrasing that let civilizations coexist without admitting how fragile peace actually was. Afterward, in their quarters on the station, Hawk taught Mixael to say new words in English. She picked up language frighteningly fast, switching between Vexthor Krill and human dialects without pause or confusion. She pointed to a holographic display showing Earth home. That's where Daddy came from, sweetie, where your human family lives. But here is home, not a question, a statement. Mixael's green eyes held certainty beyond her apparent age. This ship, you and Mommy, this is home. Hawk felt something in his chest, not Michael's ghost that had quieted over the months, but something new. Pride, maybe, or recognition that home wasn't about geography anymore. Yeah, baby girl, this is home, all of us together. Zyra moved beside them. She understands more than we give her credit for. She's smart, scary smart, takes after both parents. Hawk grinned at Zyra's expression. Mixael's eyes suddenly began to glow that golden light that indicated telepathic activity. Her small hand lifted finger pointing toward empty space. But not empty. Her eyes tracked something invisible expression shifting through concentration to delight. Her voice came clear and certain. More, there are more. More what, sweetie? She turned those glowing eyes on him, and Hawk felt the telepathic connection snap into place. Images flooded his mind, not words, but pure concept. 7 planets, 7 civilizations, all searching for the same thing Vexthor and Krill had found. Connection, understanding, peace. Mixael's hand moved in the air, golden light trailing from her fingers. She drew shapes that became coordinates, locations in space that meant nothing to Hawk but clearly resonated with something deeper. Zyra's expression shifted from maternal warmth to royal concern. She is showing us other civilizations, species we have never encountered, species that are coming here, looking for the bridge child. Hawk understood suddenly that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The treaty signed today, the peace achieved with such difficulty, was just the first step. Mixael smiled up at her parents, innocent and ancient simultaneously. They want to meet me. They want to find peace too. The holographic display shifted, showing signals from deep space that Earth's monitoring systems were just beginning to detect. 7 distinct sources, 7 civilizations, all sending the same message in mathematical constants that transcended language. We seek the bridge. Hawk looked at Zyra, seeing his own realization reflected in her purple eyes. Their daughter wasn't just the bridge between Vexthor and Krill. She was the bridge to something larger, a cosmic hope that one hybrid child could show the universe how to stop fighting itself. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, Hawk felt something like purpose settling into the hollow space where grief used to live. He'd come to this ship as a volunteer, thinking he'd give some genetic material and go home. He'd stayed out of duty, then necessity, then choice. Now he understood. This had never been about him or Zyra or even Mixael individually. It was about all of them together, family built from impossible circumstances, showing the universe that difference wasn't something to fear, but something to celebrate. His voice came steady, carrying certainty earned through months of impossible situations. Well, looks like we're going to need a bigger conference room. Zyra laughed, the sound genuine and warm. You faced potential first contact with 7 unknown civilizations with humor. Faced worse odds with less preparation. This is just bigger scale. Hawk pulled both his wife and daughter, close, the 3 of them silhouetted against the observation window where Earth rotated in silent beauty. Besides, we've got the ultimate diplomatic weapon, a telepathic hybrid who can literally show people how to understand each other. Mixael's golden glow pulsed brighter, her voice carrying joy beyond her apparent years. Adventure, Daddy. Big adventure. Yeah, baby girl. Big adventure. But we're in it together. That's what family means. You survive together. You build something better together. You face whatever comes as a unit. Outside, the 7 signals drew closer. Earth's defense systems tracked them with algorithms that didn't know whether to classify them as threat or opportunity. The Vexthor and Krill fleets maintained formation, ready to protect or welcome, depending on what arrived. And in quarters aboard a neutral station, a Marine who'd thought his war had ended decades ago held his alien wife and hybrid daughter while the universe prepared to change again. Some battles you won with weapons, others with hope. Hawk had learned to tell the difference. The worn edges of Michael's photo remained tucked in his dress blues pocket, carried more from habit now than need. The ghost was quiet, settled into something like peace. His son had died protecting others. Hawk had found purpose protecting something bigger than either of them had imagined possible. 7 civilizations coming to meet his daughter. To learn from what she represented, to find their own paths to peace through the example of 3 species who'd chosen connection over conflict. Hawk smiled, pulling his family closer as the stars wheeled overhead, and the future arrived like a promise finally kept. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The words meant something different, now faithful not just to core or country, but to the belief that bridges mattered more than walls, that understanding beat conquest, that one stubborn old soldier could still make a difference if he showed up and did the work. And the work was just beginning.